Hi, my name's Tessa Stanley, and I'm one of the art educators for the Art Gallery of St. Albert's children's programs. I am here today to show you a fun project. It's called wool needle felting, and we're going to work on a flat 2D type picture project. First things first, we're going to talk about the equipment that you're going to need. Okay, so needle felting with wool is a method of binding wool together. It can be used to make soft sculptures like this stitch that my son created, or it can be also used to do kind of 2D projects which are flat and bound to another piece of felt. We're going to work on a flat piece because this is kind of the best way to learn how to do needle felting. For this project, you do need a specialized wool felting needle. This type of needle has tiny little barbs on it that helps bind the wool together. So when you have wool, if you were to look at it under a microscope, you would notice that each shaft of the wool, similar to your own hair, has tiny little scales on it. And when we use the needle and we stab into it, what we're actually doing is taking those little scales and we're binding them together and making the wool kind of grab each other and stay stuck together. Once you have your needle, you do need some wool roving, and wool roving is just unfinished wool that has not been made into yarn. It's just colored and ready for you to use. It's great to get a beginner's package which comes in a number of different colors, and that way you can work on different projects, which like I have here. Okay, and the other thing that you'll need for this project is a flat piece of felt, and you can typically pick up pieces of felt fairly easily at craft stores as well, or if you have old wool sweaters that are no good anymore, that have holes or whatnot. I did a project where I upcycled some old wool sweaters into mitts, and I felted my sweaters myself by putting a wool sweater in really hot water in the washing machine and then in the dryer. And what that does, it shrinks your sweater down really tiny, but it binds that wool strongly together and creates a type of felt that you can also use to build a project on. Okay, so what we're going to do is learn the technique for wool felting. You do need to have a soft surface to felt on top of, so that you don't break your needles and you protect your fingers from getting stabbed by the needle. In the studio we use sponges, and at home I had an old camping mattress that was defunct and it had nice foam inside, so I cut it up and I used that for wool felting at home. What we're going to do is when you're felting the wool, you do have to make sure that as you are putting your needle in to bind it together, you're going straight up and down as you can versus going in at an angle, because if you go in at an angle and then you straighten up, you'll tend to break your needle into your foam, and then you gotta spend time trying to get it out of there. So straight up and down is the best method for wool felting. So when we're going to work, I'm just going to continue working on this piece. In the studio, we often doing the scenery of like Alberta, so often it's great to, on your piece of background felt, to maybe plan out beforehand what you're going to put on and make it simple and large versus tiny little detail, especially when you're starting, because the smaller it is, the harder it is to create something. When you are going to start putting wool onto your felt, what you're going to do is just pull off whatever piece of wool that you need. You don't need a whole lot of it, and actually you can just tease it apart a little, make it a little bit looser. You don't need a lot. The more you have, the longer it'll take you to bind and felt it together, and you want to form it into the rough shape that you're going to put down on here. So if I were making a mountain, I would make a mountain shape. I'm making a petal, so I'm creating an oval shape roughly out of this piece of wool. I'm going to set it down onto the felt underneath, and then I'm just going to carefully tack it down around the perimeter of the petal so that it's just going to bind to the piece of felt underneath. And I'm just slowly doing this part because I don't want to stab my finger, but I also want to make sure I'm getting it into the right spot that I want. I can use my needle to pull some of those edges in and get it into that nice shape. And then once I've got it down, I can then begin to felt a lot faster, getting my hands out of the way and stabbing that wool down fairly quickly. Okay, what I'm doing is I'm binding that wool together as well. You can see on the back of this that I am binding it into the felt on the back, and you can actually see it coming out on the back too. So if I spend a fair bit of time just stabbing in one simple spot, what I end up doing is I actually make an indentation in that spot, and that can be very helpful if I'm making like a face and I wanted to put an eye or something in that spot. But with this one, I want it to be fairly loose and puffy, so it looks like it's coming up out of there. And I don't want to overbind it by just sitting in one spot and stabbing in one spot. So I'm just going to gently felt that all together. And then once it's down good, then I would move on to the next piece. So obviously I would form that next shape of that petal and put it down there and continue binding that one in. Okay. From there, if I wanted to cover a large area at once, let's say I wanted to do a green background, I would get my piece of wool roving. I can gently tease it apart. I don't really want a lot of wool. It'll just take longer to felt it down. And I just gently tease it apart so it's very light and fluffy. And then what I can do is I gently lay it down, and I take my felting needle, and I'm going to go around the perimeter of whatever I'm felting around, so that this is going to end up being my background. And I'm just slowly poking around the edges to fill it in. Oops, make sure I'm not covering up the design I already have there. And so I'm doing the background fairly loosely and lightly so that I have a nice fill, and then I can follow along the edge of this so that it's following the design, and then I can go a little bit faster once I get it on. And then I can continue taking more roving and filling up these other spots as well. So I would continue on and finish filling that out, and then as I gain more experience, then it's a good time to go on and try other projects. And you can find lots of cool videos online that teach you how to do that. So thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoy wool felting.